Hi everyone, I'm making shrimp stir fry today, and I normally don't make this, but shrimp was on sale, so I grabbed a bag, 2 pounds. I'll only be using 1 pound in this recipe. Um, this is a really easy recipe. If you don't like shrimp, or if you're vegan, you can use tofu, or just omit the meat substitute altogether, and it should be just fine with just the vegetables and the spices. The recipe that I have, I don't know where it came from originally. I've had it saved as a Word document for a really long time with my substitutions and my quantities. And it says 1/4 medium yellow onion, which is something I never buy. So I also tend to substitute half of a white onion sometimes when I make this instead. Um, it looks like I have half of a white onion here, or a little more than half. And I diced up the whole thing. I didn't think I was going to use all of the onions though, so in this recipe I only used about half of the onions that are diced in that container. But I figured I might as well dice all of them and then freeze the leftover onions, because it's about as much as I would need for pretty much any other recipe of mine. And I like doing that because it just means I don't have to buy an onion next time I decide to make something with onions. It's already like ready in the freezer, diced up, waiting to go. As long as you are planning to turn the onions soft when you cook them, then it's okay if you freeze them straight raw without any preparation. A lot of raw vegetables that are frozen do end up kind of soft once you cook them, so you just have to make sure that's the goal anyway. And then this recipe calls for 2 red potatoes. This is a pretty cheap recipe to make, omitting the shrimp, obviously. It's like $5.97 a pound when I bought it. I was planning on getting all the ingredients from Walmart, except that they didn't have individual potatoes, only big bags, and I was not happy with that. So, not cool, Walmart. Let me buy a single potato if I want to. Don't know what that's all about. I'm not going to go through potatoes that fast. So I am cubing these, and the reason I'm making the onions and the potatoes first, or I'm prepping them first, is because the onions take forever to cook. So right now I'm spraying canola oil into my very large, I think it's 12 inches, stainless steel pan. I'm pouring in the onions, and this is where I decided I wasn't going to use the whole thing. I started pouring it, and I thought, good grief, this is a lot of onions. Let's just store that. So here I'm showing you my freezer storing, I guess it's organizing method. I have this erasable permanent marker. It's from Label Once. I wrote the word onions on it, and it comes with an eraser, but also you can just use rubbing alcohol to clean the labels and change what you wrote on it. So I stuck that in the freezer after writing onions on the container. I started doing that pretty recently because sometimes I couldn't tell what the heck I had frozen. So that's a nice tip if you like to freeze things and you maybe can't tell sometimes what it is. I'm not sponsoring anything. It's just something I bought on eBay actually and liked it a lot. So you're seeing here now that the potatoes, and this could be just my skillet. I use this one because I need one really, really big. The nonstick skillet I have is not quite as big. I think it's 2 or 4 inches smaller in diameter. And the potatoes keep sticking to the stainless steel pan, which is annoying, but it doesn't seem to affect anything else when it's cooking. So I have to keep adding spray oil constantly. And one way to avoid this would be either to make the potatoes in a nonstick pan, like my smaller one, and then just transfer them into this when they're cooked, which takes a while to get them soft, or to maybe just pour more oil into the pan to begin with instead of spraying like little tiny amounts of oil constantly. And then I'm spraying the food, not even the pan, and then I'm stirring it to kind of let the oil touch the pan, like stir the food so the oil makes contact with the pan. I don't know if that's the best way to do it. Every time I make this, the potatoes do this, and it always turns out fine, so I don't really worry. But you'll see in a few minutes that the bottom of the pan looks like it's scorched, and it's not. That came up pretty easily. It's just starch from the potatoes sticking to it. So the recipe says to cook the potatoes until they start changing color, and I covered the skillet because I thought that would help it to cook faster, because sometimes steam attributes to how fast something's cooking, and I kind of wanted to contain the steam. So the changing color thing is a little bit weird. I don't know why the recipe says that. You can watch them get a little bit brown or singed, but they also, when they are cooking, or when they're in the right cooked enough, they'll kind of start to look slightly more translucent. You should be able to stick a fork in it pretty easily, and you're also welcome to bite one and taste it and see if it doesn't crunch. It should not be crunching. So here I am adding more oil because this is what's going to happen for the next, I'm going to guess, 10 minutes of cooking. It's not 10 minutes of video, don't worry. But it takes a while before the potatoes really cook, and it takes a while to keep them from sticking. And once the potatoes are soft, I noticed it didn't stick anymore. So I'm not sure what is causing it, but it's always happened when I've had potatoes in the skillet, which is pretty much just for this recipe. I don't make potatoes too often. And when I do, it's not usually something like this where they're in a skillet with very little oil. If you like this recipe so far, please like, share, and subscribe and help us reach new people who are interested in healthier cooking. There is a lot of steam coming off of my skillet, and I did turn the exhaust fan on at some point, but that's just going to keep happening until the potatoes get much softer, so sorry for that. I know it affects what you can see, and it's not the greatest. Having more oil should reduce the smokiness as well. So you may want to pour 3 tablespoons of oil in the pan instead of just spraying it with nonstick spray. I think if I do remember this next time I make this recipe, I will try that to see if that prevents all this scorching on the bottom. When the potatoes start getting a little bit more translucent and cooked looking and soft looking, you can start adding your broccoli and carrots. I'm doing broccoli first. It's supposed to be 1 cup of frozen broccoli, but we bought this gigantic crown at the grocery store. I cut it in half because my husband needed half of it for something else. So I'm just going to, I guess I must have washed it off too after I cut it. I didn't wash off the part he was going to use because I wasn't sure how soon he was going to use that. And if you wash produce too early, that can cause mold. So don't just wash vegetables and stick them back in your freezer, or your fridge. That's not so great for them. But then once you're ready. So for this recipe, cut the broccoli into little bite-sized pieces. Sometimes that means I cut a little floret in half, and I cut the stems shorter. You just want it to be relatively easy to eat. And then this recipe calls for 2 carrots. I try to get larger ones when I can. You take off the top and tails, and then you're going to peel them. And then after you peel them, the way I like to cut carrots for this recipe, and actually most of my recipes, you could cut them into little circles. But what I tend to do is kind of cut them into 2 or 3 inch slices, and then I take those slices and I quarter them. So I cut that in half, and then I cut the other piece in half if it's thick enough. If it's not that thick, then I'll just halve the slices so that there's several longish pieces of carrots. So you're almost like you're making your own carrot sticks from scratch. I do this because I think it is easier to eat than the little round pieces. I think it might cook differently as well because they're bigger. So and if you cut them into quarters lengthwise, then that helps them cook faster. But I don't know. I think this recipe might have originally told me to cut the carrots this way, and then I started doing it for everything. So cover once the carrots and broccoli are added, and cook for 10 minutes. And after that, the broccoli should be pretty much done. One thing I forgot about was I'm adding zucchini and squash to this recipe. This is not part of my original recipe. I just had zucchini and squash from a friend who gave it to me. I had them in the freezer, and now I'm draining. I drained, like, there's excess water that came out when it defrosted. I drained that, and then I threw that in here because I figured it would taste fine with everything else, and it totally did. So if you've got vegetables that aren't part of this list, try them out anyway. Corn would probably be fine in this recipe. Pretty much anything that I guess isn't too moisture heavy would probably be good. I wouldn't put tomatoes in this. So yeah, the 10 minutes have passed, and then I'm stirring up the food in the skillet. Oh, and now we're adding the shrimp. While the 10 minutes were passing, that this was all cooking, I peeled some shrimp. So I measured out 1 pound of shrimp from my bag, or half the bag, peeled them, and then I'm throwing them in here, and I'm seasoning it with the Creole seasoning, which if you don't have any of that, salt, pepper, garlic, onion powder, I also think, and the most important thing is cayenne. So you can do a mixture of that. I just wanted it spicy. I pretty much use a mix like this for this recipe all the time. So I added quite a lot of seasoning, actually, more than I typically add when I'm cooking. I also didn't add any liquid hot sauce, which might give it a little bit of a, I don't know, like a glazed coating perhaps, depending on how much you add. But stir it, and then be very careful with cooking the shrimp. I have, on many occasions, overcooked shrimp. I decided to cook this for 2 minutes. My recipe says 3, but I wanted to make sure that nothing overcooked. Shrimp overcooks very easily, and you can tell if it's a little bit too chewy. It's a little bit too solid. So I turned off the heat right there after stirring it a little bit and then figuring out the shrimp appeared to be mostly all the way cooked through. If you undercook shrimp by a little bit, it's all right. Just microwave it, and that'll cook it. That's another reason why I didn't want to overcook the shrimp, because I always have leftovers, and I didn't want overcooked shrimp for my leftovers. So I actually just finished this entire thing last night, and none of the shrimp was overcooked. So I definitely recommend being very careful when you're cooking the shrimp. I remember finding this recipe about 10 years ago when I got divorced from my first husband, and I made it all the time. I don't remember where I found it, probably Pinterest. And then I met my current husband, and he said something like, potatoes don't go in stir fry. And so if you have been saying that the whole time, I'm sorry. You can see that potatoes are cooked, though. Like, they are kind of not completely white anymore. They're definitely soft, you can tell. But so sorry that the potatoes are in here. I know it's probably not authentic. There's no soy sauce either, which I'm assuming is normal for stir fry. And there's no rice, which my husband always acts surprised about. But there's enough, like, that's what the potatoes are. That's the starch. You don't need rice. And no, this isn't authentic. I only cook authentic Cajun food. Everything else is, let me throw these ingredients together and see what happens. And I'll call it whatever it most closely resembles. So I tried to get everything in one bite, but I couldn't. And I took my second bite of shrimp and zucchini to see if the zucchini worked in this dish. So if you don't have the potatoes and you have the zucchini, omit that, add the zucchini. If you don't have the broccoli, add the zucchini, whatever. It's to mix it up however you want. Throw different vegetables in there. For the most part, if you cook it this way and have food in there that you like, peppers will probably be fine too if you're a big pepper fan. It's going to come out fine. So here I am adding even more spices. I just wanted to, show this to you, that after I tasted it, I said, this isn't spicy enough. More spices is never a bad idea, at least if you're me. So I really hope you like this recipe. It is delicious. I hope you try it. And happy eating, everyone.